I was thinking about myself and about my past flirtation with atheism and why it was so attractive. And I think atheism sounds cool. And since we like to write our own personal stories, sometimes we write bad stories that looks cool. It's almost like in the movies such as Goodfellas, for example, or Scarface, or The Godfather, where you have bad people are main characters and the entire story goes around them. And I think that's what atheism is in some sense, because it gives you such an freedom without deserving this freedom. You just accept atheism and suddenly you're above religion, and suddenly you can look upon people who have faith in God and you can just say, I'm too smart for this faith. That's what happened to me. I was thinking that, I was impressed when I was a teenager with Lucifer, for example, because I saw Lucifer as the one who defied authority of God, who was something like a rebellion, who was something who went against God, against the power, and for which he was thrown down to hell. And it was very attractive because in some sense it was intermingled with my own evolvement. When you're a teenager, you want to define authority, you want to define people around you, you want to do something different than you see people do around you. But then when the years go by, I start thinking about God, since you have tragedies that happen in your life and you try to understand why those tragedies happen. And also come back to atheism and humanism. You can justify almost anything when you're atheist. You can bend rules a little bit, you can do this and you can do that, and you can negotiate with your impulses and with your vices. That's what I did. I always negotiate with my vices. And if you're intelligent enough and have enough vocabulary, you can actually make pretty reasonable negotiation with yourself. The problem is, even with a reasonable negotiation, you will lose something crucial within you and also your life, because your life is limited. And every mistake you make, you're not going to get it back. You're not going to be able to correct your past. And your future, in some sense, repeat your past. And that's why you have to really carefully reconsider your past mistakes to be able not to repeat them in the future. And that's like humanism, for example. It's assumption that we smart enough to have rules and to comply in those rules and not to hurt each other. Unfortunately, we're not smart enough for humanism. And another thing, what is the humanist story? What exactly? It's story of the progress, story of the science. And how many people are able to understand this progress and to write the story along with this progress? Only about 5% like scientists or intellectuals. The rest of us just understand progress from the position of consumerism. I'm a consumer. I consume good. I consume pornography. I consume social media. I consume the screens. I consume everything that makes my life easy and gives me much more pleasure to experience as cheap as possible. We don't write story through progressive, through this scientific development, because majority of people just live their life and they try to numb themselves as much as they can, because life is not simple. That's what I was doing too. You have to know why you sacrifice yourself or your vices. For why? Why would you sacrifice your vices? Really, what is this reasonable explanation? Why would humanists sacrifice your vices? Because it makes no sense. Even I love Christopher Hitchens, but he died from throat cancer and it was triggered by his love for alcohol. He never sacrificed alcohol because he loved it. He loved to drink. He drank a lot. And eventually it cost him his throat cancer. That's what he wrote in his book, Mortality. My point is, he didn't find maybe his life important enough to sacrifice this particular vice. You see, there's some problem with humanism and atheism, and the big problem is the sacrifice. We have to learn to sacrifice, but it's almost impossible to sacrifice when you're atheist because you don't see the point of the sacrifice in the first place. And that's what I saw too, because, for example, I enjoy women and I didn't want to commit myself to any of them because I could justify it. It's free love. It's free idea of sex. When you see sex as a tool, what's the point of sacrifice yourself, your freedom, to one woman? What's the point to do that? You don't think about the future. You don't think about to create family, to make your life better. You're just thinking about your vices that you keep exploring. And since society keep expanding their boundaries, their moral frame wider and wider, your vices become more normal and normal, because we start normalizing almost everything. Almost everything becomes normal. And I think if we don't stop this frame from expansion, this moral frame would collapse. And in the end, we're not going to have borders and mayhem happen. And we eventually would drown in our own vices that we weren't able to resist because we normalized them in the first place. What would you resist to something you normalize? That's how I feel. Because I try to understand why the West is crumbling right now under its own freedom. And I learned one thing, that this freedom is the reason because we confuse two kinds of freedom. We confuse real freedom that is involuntarily restrained with the freedom of your biology, where you just become enslaved by your own vices. Because once we have freedom where we voluntarily restrain ourselves, when we subjugate our biology, subjugate our vices, and control them, completely control them. From the other side, we have freedom where we get subjugated by our own biology. Because that's the point. It's like when you watch a movie, right? Why they show you love through sex? Because there's no other way to show it. Because love, it's a feeling of intimacy. And how you can show intimacy without sex? You can't. But the problem is you start confusing when you watch movies like this again and again, that the point of love is just sex. Because that's what they show in the movies. Love manifests itself in sex. In real life, love is something that you have to practice every single day through many years with one person by making sacrifices. And these sacrifices commit yourself 100% to the person you love. In the movies, they don't show it. They show sexual act itself because there's no other way to show. Otherwise, it would be incredibly boring, incredibly unromantic, and incredibly even repulsive, because I don't want to have this in my life. But in real life, everything is different. In real life, it's day after day of practice of certain things. Another thing, what would humanism teach us to practice? What exactly you would practice? Seems like humanism doesn't have practice at all. It's just a bunch of rules. Here you go. Now go and write your own story. And people are like, I don't know what kind of story I want. Nobody gave me no directions. And that's what I remember about myself, because I was jumping from one story to another. I want to be this, I want to be that. And I have no idea what is the main meta story, because there's none. But in religion, you have such a story. The story of sacrifice and the story of the meaning that you look while you go. And also all these religious rituals helps you to establish correct practice within your life to become better every single day. Because our life is our story. You write story the way you go, and you cannot write a story without your observer who perceives you from the third person perspective. Another thing about humanism and atheism, they don't have observer because they are complete biology. They just an accident that was born, live, and die as an accident. That was the point to write story in the first place. atheism or humanism is supposed to be simple. You're born, you procreate, you die, that's it. While religious, like Christianity, it teaches you right idea of living and the right idea of a proper sacrifice, because you have to make a proper sacrifice, and your proper sacrifice is your biology, because sacrificing your biology, you help your observer to become more sharp and therefore perceive the world much more accurately and help you with directions toward a real meaning of your life. We have to have unity in our meaning, because we cannot, everyone shouldn't have different meaning. We have the same culture, and all culture based on a religion. And we have to have the same meaning within our culture, because our culture must benefit from the meaning of the people who live inside this culture. If everybody is going to have different meanings, how are we supposed to negotiate with each other? How are we even supposed to negotiate with ourselves? Because we are not only divide with each other, we divide within our own selves. And that's what humanism does, because if you notice, we become much more weaker as society, since we just worship our body and we think that the whole idea of life is our biology. The whole idea of life is to just keep satisfying our vices, act upon our weak impulses, and keep going this way. But that makes us weak. That's why we become much more weaker. The scientific progress, the Industrial Revolution, made our life incredibly comfortable and safe, and even extended our life for many more years to live. But the problem is, now we know that we can live, but we don't know why we have to live, why we have to exist in the first place, why do we have to struggle, because life is a struggle. And even comfortable life is a struggle, because even lying on the couch, doing nothing, playing video games, or watch pornography, you still have something in the back of your hand that you're doing something wrong, that you have to go outside, find your dragon, defeat this dragon, and save the princess, because that's our internal story. That's the way we have to live. Especially if you're a man, you have to fight for something. You have to fight for truth. And to be able to discover this truth, you have to discover yourself first. But you cannot discover yourself first if you hide yourself behind the comfort. Because comfort is the worst thing. Comfort made out of a tiger is a fat, useless, harmless house cat. And that's what happened to our civilization. That's what happened to our men, because out of the warriors we become Walmart clerks who has no meaning in their life, who just has no idea why we're living for. You just wake up and have no idea what's happening around you. You just try to exist, and you don't know why you exist, and you even never ask question why you have to exist, why you have to be alive. Because it's just physical comfort, but the comfort of your soul, the comfort of your mind, the comfort of your observer that must stay sharp lies in religion, in Christianity itself. Why? Because it teaches us to make a proper sacrifice of our own biology. And with this sacrifice, we sacrifice our comfort, sacrifice our laziness, sacrifice our pleasures. And that gives us something close to the meaning. That's how we start discovering the meaning within us, through the struggle. Because tragedies happens all the time with us, and we can numb ourselves against those tragedies and would never understand why they happen in the first place. We just numb ourselves with alcohol, with pornography, with drugs, with anything. Or we can face those tragedies by being sober and try to find some deepness in those tragedies, some hidden meaning, and then try to understand this hidden meaning, become better, become more warriors, stronger, and much more persistent in our goals, and try to achieve something. Because I see people complaining. That they have no goals. To be able to discover your own goal, you have to discover yourself. Everything in this world starts within you. And that's how you're supposed to live. You have to start within yourself. That's what I'm trying to do. I try to understand myself first. And once you start understanding yourself, you suddenly realize what you want. And suddenly something within you, this voice that you can call voice of God, will whisper to you what's the meaning and the point of your life.